All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.
Yay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. Oops. Hopefully I won't end up on my face during this. I am the founder and executive director of Diggity Dogs Service Dogs. We were up in Shelburne. We just relocated to Greenfield recently. Some of you may not have heard of us. We specialize in psychiatric, medical alert, and non-load-bearing mobility dogs, meaning that we don't put weight on the dogs. But I'll tell you more about that. To give you a little insight to what we do, I want to introduce you to Michaela, one of our clients. When Michaela was 6 years old, she had a seizure that was so severe that she almost died. She almost asphyxiated, and no one was there to help, and it was an extremely close call. Since that time, her parents have been so concerned about her welfare that they had never actually let her sleep alone again. As you can imagine, that had a major impact on their lives as well as Michaela's. And medications had done a great deal to reduce Michaela's symptoms, but they had never been able to eliminate them completely. And as they only occurred during the night, it was also incredibly difficult for them to develop any system that would be able to discern the difference between her sort of tossing and turning, dreaming self, and an actual seizure, until her service dog, Ferris. And so this is Michaela's new nighttime routine, rather than sleeping in her parents' room. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a little short. Did everybody see that? Anyway, so as you can see, her nighttime routine is very different than having to sleep in her parents' room. We were actually able to teach Ferris the difference between a different response based on whether he thought she was definitely having a seizure or whether he was unsure. This is a canine phone. The large button can be pressed, and it's designed to call whatever number you program it to call once that button is pressed. And so it also has an audible function, so it can basically sound an alarm that would be audible within the house, or it could call 911 and say, my name is Michaela, it's so-and-so, I'm having a seizure, there's a key under the door. It's a device that Michaela could take with her and sleep over at friends' houses, things like that. This is a video. Just in this next video, I'll have you look at what it looks like for Ferris to sound the alarm. If you take Michaela's going, this is actually a video of the first time that Michaela met Ferris at our training center, and the first time she's testing his response. And so you'll have to look closely because she's going to pretend basically to sleep for a few minutes, and then she will start to shake very subtly. Her seizures were quite subtle, and Ferris will then respond and sound the alarm. The shaky camera doesn't help. You can see her start to shake. And so we were actually able to teach Ferris that if he's unsure whether she was having a seizure or not, he would lick her face. As most people, even when they're sleeping, will push a dog away from themselves in their if a dog is licking their face. But if he was absolutely certain, he would go right for the button. If she doesn't push him away and he's licking her face, then he goes for the button as well. Most people, when they hear the term service dog, think of guide dogs, or also known as seeing eye dogs. And the first guide dogs in America were, the first guide dog in America was here in the 1920s. And there was a gentleman that went over to Germany. He heard about them being trained. It was German Shepherd, and went over there for several years and actually trained one for himself and brought it back to the States. And this was a very big deal at the time. People hadn't imagined a dog being able to escort somebody around town. He was invited to the White House, all sorts of things like that. He was in all the newspapers. And one of the things I love about this story is if you look at the interviews with him, he's always asked, what's the biggest difference that this dog made in your life? And you would expect it to be something like, I can cross the street, or I can go to the store. But it's actually, in every interview I've ever read, his answer was always, people speak to me. And I think that speaks volumes of the power that the dogs have to be an incredible social bridge. Of course, not everybody wants that additional attention, but it's most common for our clients to say things like, I've lived here for 10 years and never really felt like I was part of this community until I got my dog, and now I know everybody, and I'm, and they're just, their ability to transform lives goes usually far beyond their actual service tasks. It wasn't until the 1950s that people started experimenting with other ways that service dogs could help people in the form of hearing assistance dogs. Hearing assistance dogs generally do things like let you know when somebody's at the door, will wake you or get you if a smoke detector goes off, or a carbon monoxide detector. It wasn't until the 70s that people thought, oh, what else could they do? And started developing mobility assistance dogs. Mobility assistance dogs, I'm sure some of you have seen them, can do some incredible things, but let's look at a few examples of our dogs in training. They can do things like find your keys, I don't know why the sound is so soft again. They can retrieve items from the fridge. They can find your phone.
Yes, good girl. That's a good girl.
Go get the lights.
Turn the lights off or on.
Good girl.
Help with daily tasks like getting dressed or undressed.
Yes, good boy. Good. Sock. Thank you, my good boy. Sock.
And tests like this might not seem like a big deal, but for a lot of our clients, they might manage to get through a day performing the tasks that are required of them out in public, but a lot of times by the time they're home, they are spent. They have used all their spoons, so to speak, if anybody's familiar with the spoon concept, but basically they are exhausted in little things like getting dressed, getting up and turning out the lights, getting a bottle of water from the fridge can really make a big difference in them being able to remain a functioning member of society, or fulfill their daily obligations. We also have a lot of clients with things like chronic pain conditions, and of course they can retrieve just about anything. This is Isaac also getting the mail. Remote control. Yeah. So it wasn't until much more recently that people started experimenting with the types of dogs that we generally produce. Dogs are now used for conditions such as autism, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. We've even trained an Alzheimer's assistance dog, although that is of course fraught with its own problems and requires a sort of 3-person team rather than a 1-person team. A lot of times when these when our dogs are interacting with their people, they are just one tool in the toolbox, so to speak. So for most of our clients, medication and therapy also serves a primary role in maintaining their health. But our dogs are able to do things that neither therapy or medication can do. They do things like wake you up in the middle of the night for seizures or nightmare alerts. They do things like interrupting self-destructive behaviors. And they also are able to intervene a lot of times long before the person actually knows that they're exhibiting symptoms. So our goal for our dogs is to teach them to detect the physical manifestations of the person's symptoms or stress at the earliest possible signs of it, right? We want to intervene so that the client no longer ends up with the full escalation of symptoms if possible. Whether that is, sometimes it's unavoidable like a seizure, but we graduated one dog that gives his client 3 hours notice of a seizure. So instead of possibly falling down the stairs and injuring herself, she's able to, she's not able to have a driver's license because she has seizures, but she has enough time to go and tell her boss she's going home, organize a ride home from work, go to a safe place, and then have the dog lay with her. And that's a very different thing than feeling like you could fall down the stairs at any moment. A lot of times, as I said, too, these behaviors are things that the clients are unaware of, and if they were allowed to continue, they might escalate into something like a full-blown panic attack or sensory overload. And so I want to show you another quick video of one of our dogs interrupting a mild self-destructive behavior that we far too many of us do, but nail biting. A lot of our clients struggle with things like compulsive scratching, skin picking, hair pulling. Sometimes they're tremors, that are either brought out by anxiety or by medications, things like pill rolling. And some of our clients have public jobs, and the people they work with are unaware of what they're doing, of what they're struggling with. And the dog interrupting them allows them to not only prevent the full escalation of symptoms, but for them to sort of keep that in check in terms of what is observable to the other members of the public. So you'll see here, that's Callie, and she's just persistently bumping Emily here for nail biting. And so she would keep at it until she stopped nail biting. And so we can do that with any of the other type of behaviors that I described. Also, the dogs do things like extend their personal space in public. For a lot of our clients, just an extra couple of feet can make a big difference in as to whether they're, what? Okay, thanks. As to whether they can cope in any given situation. So whether that's because of a social phobia or anxiety or because of sensory challenges that they experience. And so what you saw here was Callie using our standard alert. So it was she was sitting. If she were standing, it would be a nose bump on the thigh. And we use that behavior in particular so that it can't easily be mistaken for affection. You know, dogs don't normally walk up to you and just like, you know? And so we don't want it to be something that the client is going to sort of dismiss and pat on the head and just, you know, lay down. And so let's look at what an example of a dog intervening during a sensory overload episode. This is one of our graduated dogs and actually one of our extremely talented trainers here. She's such a ham in this video, it's so funny. Looking right at the video. So what Kira is performing here is actually a behavior we call visit. And we do it in a variety of different ways, but basically it's a form of deep pressure therapy. So some of you may be familiar with deep pressure therapy. It's the same reason that swaddling a baby often causes them to stop crying, or some of you may have heard of thunder shirts for dogs. They work on the same premise, or weighted blankets for trauma patients. And so what happens is it's a physiological response that the body has to pressure. And so what's going on is you're shutting down the sympathetic nervous system and turning on the parasympathetic nervous system. So you're going from that fight or flight mode to rest and digest mode. And what's wonderful about this is it is a physiological response. So if we can have the dog prompt the interruption, all that person has to do is sit back or whatever, and the dog mitigates the symptoms. Because a lot of times when people are in that panic attack mode, what's happening is the sort of executive functions and the decision-making process part of their brain is not functioning very well. And so some people may have other coping mechanisms at their disposal that they're just not capable of utilizing at that moment. A lot of our clients do use things like DBT techniques or breathing techniques, awareness exercises to help them once the dog alerts to them, but other people would find the deep pressure therapy more helpful. For other people, it might be a PRN, right? It might be a medication that they take, or just using touching the dog as a sort of grounding device to bring them into the moment, whether they're dissociating or it can often help alleviate the social anxiety of that sort of cascades out of control when they're already feeling panic. And so by just having something there to focus on and the dog and thinking externally about the dog, it often allows them to avoid the full escalation of the symptoms altogether. So, I'd like to introduce another one of our clients. A lot of times also the dogs are able to offer assistance or behavior interruption in ways that people are able to hear where they couldn't necessarily hear it from other people in their lives, right? A lot of times they are family members and there's a lot of sort of weighted history behind things. This is a really common thing with people that struggle with bipolar disorder. You know, a lot of times it's hard for them to hear from family members, you're acting manic, you know, but the dog, on the other hand, is a very neutral thing. They understand that they've identified the behaviors and taught the dog to, and you know, we've taught the dog to do this in advance, and they know what their response is supposed to be. For other people, it's also a way of getting better without having to immerse themselves in an incredibly social environment, such as an inpatient institution. And so I'll introduce one of our clients here.
Harper came into my life. I was so terrified of people and the outside world that I couldn't leave my basement. and I had not left the house for a year and a half before I got Harper. My inability to be around a lot of people, I was left with very few options of what to do. And when it was suggested to me that a service dog might be a good idea, it opened up a whole new thing in my mind that I could actually get help and feel better without having to deal with other people. So it gave me a different avenue than just medicating myself to the point where I was not there anymore. I don't know where I'd be without him.
That's a really common thing that we hear from our clients. A lot of the sort of standard protocols for dealing with things like anxiety and social phobias are medications that leave people feeling very disoriented, not themselves, unable to perform their jobs, or just constantly paranoid about how out of it they feel, and so it affects their personal relationships. And the dogs provide an alternate route. They also, of course, for a lot of these medications are habit forming. And so a lot of people that either have experienced addiction or have addiction in their family may not want to go that route. Jason was an incredibly productive member of society for a long time. He has a daughter, but around the time that he came to us, she was about 8 years old. He was a surgical nurse technician, so he was assisting in like ERs and cardiac surgeries, and until he started doing some first responder work and basically had an experience that was so traumatic that it turned him from that highly capable individual into somebody that was so scared of the outside world that they couldn't leave their house. And so some of these things for a lot of people will happen quite suddenly. We had a police officer that had to dig through the bodies after a train crash to try and identify bodies and find wallets and things like that. That was never the same again. We've had several survivors of domestic abuse. We've had people that have been survived sexual assault or rape. And so you may have noticed a general uptick in the last few years of in the number of service dogs that you've encountered out in public, and there's good reason for that. Basically we are figuring out more and more conditions that we're able to help with, whether it's detecting blood sugar for diabetic people, which we do through training with saliva samples, or the seizure alerts that we showed here, or things like autism or PTSD or traumatic brain injury, right? These are all really new evolutions in the service dog world. And so it's a really exciting time to be in the industry. It really feels like we're just starting to scratch the surface of what the dogs are truly capable of. Considering our relationship with them has lasted tens of thousands of years, and they've been an incredibly intimate part of our life. They were really the first domesticated species, and been an incredible intimate part of our life for so long. It's only been 100 years that we've been had this sort of development of them assisting people with disabilities. And so it is really exciting. However, it's an incredibly challenging endeavor to train a service dog. As you can imagine, it requires just an absurd amount of time. It's one of the reasons that most of the organizations that do train service dogs have had to be really innovative about how they manage to do that. It's an incredibly costly endeavor as well. And the average graduation rate for most service dog organizations is 50 to 70%. So 50 to 70% of the dogs that you have in training will go on to be service dogs, right? And that's for people that are training that's what they do, is train service dogs, and that's with most of the organizations like ours have nothing but the highest standards for health and the kinds of dogs that we're working with. There's still so many factors that are difficult to control. And so a lot of organizations have had to be really ingenious about how they go about that. Some organizations have brought in, created partnerships with things like prisons and had the prisoners train the service dogs. There's a famous organization here in Massachusetts that was one of the first in the world doing that. And our organization has done something similar through university students. And so we actually have a partnership with UMass Amherst and thereby the 5 colleges as part of the 5 college consortium, where the students actually get credit for becoming expert service dog trainers. And so the dogs, we formerly always purchased our dogs from breeders. We now have our own breeding program. And so the dogs are in an incredibly important stage of development until they're about 14 to 16 weeks. They are in what's known as their socialization period. So basically, the experiences that they have during that time will largely determine what they are going to be like as older dogs. Not to say that you can't change a dog past that age, but it's a lot easier before that. And so we are basically exposing them to as much as possible and in an incredibly positive way during that time. So we expose them to things that are common for dogs to be scared of, whether it's like a vacuum cleaner or hats and sunglasses, brooms and fishing poles and you name it. We're running around with, Halloween costumes on, and we're putting them in all sorts of outfits, and really just trying to have everything that they do feel really positive and teach them not only to not be scared of those things, but teach them to have confidence. We really, teaching the service tasks, I always say this, is the easy part. What's really difficult is making a very confident, self-assured dog that can reliably perform those behaviors as well. And so we're also giving them the foundations for basic obedience during that time, of course. That includes sit down, come, stay, leave it, drop it, and wait, as well as house training and crate training. So it is a really busy, crazy time. But once we get the dogs to that sort of 14 to 16 week, sometimes 12 week, depending on the dogs, stage, they then go out to live with the foster volunteer. Our fosters then have the dog with them basically not at all times, but until they graduate. We have a network of roughly 160, 170 students that have been trained to some degree, and at any given point in time, we have about 25 to 30 full-time fosters. And so some of those other individuals are relief fosters, so they've gone through some basic training, and they would help a full-time foster if they had to go away for a weekend or had a day where they couldn't have the dog, or sometimes it's spring break or over winter break or summer. But the full-time fosters take on a much larger task. Endeavor. And so basically they attend classes. We have 3 classes. There's beginner, intermediate, and advanced classes. And they are for 3 hours, 1 night a week each. And each class they learn 2 new behaviors. And all the dogs are working on what we call the core curriculum, which is comprised of 100 different behaviors until they're about 10 to 12 months. At that point, they're then assigned to a client, and they begin preparing for that client's specific needs. The students also are responsible for producing 20 minutes of video homework each week, and every 4 weeks they're assessed on their cumulative progress as a group. And so we can know at any given point in time where each dog is in the training process. From the client's perspective, once they enroll with us, we work with them on what we call their symptoms and services worksheet. And so we're basically breaking down those physical manifestations of their symptoms, as I described before, and teaching those behaviors to the dogs as the cues for the service response. Of course, we also have to decide what the most helpful response would be for that client in any given situation. A lot of times there's some contextual diversity. So, if you're at home versus out in public, or if you're sitting versus standing, how does that change what kind of response you want? A lot of people, we have Kira, who you saw in one of the videos, for example, had a client that had incredible migraines. It was just one of her conditions, but incredible migraines that would come on very fast and leave her virtually unable to open her eyes, incredibly photosensitive. And so if she would just have to do this at home, all she would have to do is find her bed. She could lay down. Kia would turn out the lights, shut the door, go get her medication bag, bring it to the table, bring her a thing of water so she could cope. And so I want to introduce a couple of our incredibly experienced, wonderful fosters and some of our dogs, and then maybe I thought you guys might have some questions and we can talk to you guys about anything you want to know about. You guys want to come up? We've been very lucky to retain a lot of the fosters that come and do this end up staying with us, which we are, like I said, incredibly lucky to have. It's obviously something that not only transforms the lives of the people that get the dogs, but completely transforms the college experience that these fosters are having. And so, do you want to introduce yourselves?
My name's Courtney. I'm a senior at UMass studying animal science, and this is Monkey here. I'm Laura. I'm also a senior at UMass studying animal science, and this is Odin.
I'm Zach. I'm also a senior at UMass doing animal science.
We have a lot of animal science students. Obviously UMass has a very strong animal science program, so a lot of the students that do come foster are pre-vet students, which is also wonderful for them. We're actually the only class at UMass that you can get hands-on canine experience or small animal experience. UMass has such a good pre-vet program, but it's known for large animals mostly, like horses and cows and things like that. And so, you can imagine how much more capable a veterinarian would be knowing as much as about behavior and behavioral psychology and training as our fosters do when they go on to actually become veterinarians. One of our board members is actually just finishing up her being at veterinary school. She also has a master's in animal behavior, and they have so much to teach veterinarians that they just don't get to behavior. They really don't. And so, I like to think that they'll go on to help all of the dogs that have better veterinary experiences later as well. And so these guys have all graduated multiple dogs. And so Courtney graduated Haven, who was she was in one of the videos there, was her first dog and has now been with us at least 4 years. Laura just graduated a dog last couple weeks ago that went on to be a young boy with autism ADHD, his assistance dog, a little 10-year-old boy. And Zach has graduated multiple dogs too, Kira, who I mentioned, and they are now working as what we call finishers. And so they are basically the highly capable trainers that once a foster has taught the dog all of their behaviors and they're generally reliable in every environment, they will then get moved to a very experienced trainer that can make sure that those behaviors are absolutely reliable and absolutely perfect in every context. And so it doesn't, most people, you're not able to become a sort of finisher until you've certainly at least finished one dog. And so, before I open up for questions, I just wanted to say that I hope that through learning a little bit about the types of service dogs we do, some people might give pause when you see a service dog in public, because a lot of times they don't necessarily look like they're working hard, but they are. You can see that sort of focus that, of course I turn and say that and they stop looking, but they're constantly monitoring their handlers. I mean, Odin, for example, is only 5 months old and he would barely take his eyes off Laura. But that sort of focus is essential for being able to pick up things like, subtle tics. That pill rolling that I mentioned before is one of the first behaviors we teach them to alert to because it's such a subtle behavior. We want them to be paying that sort of fine attention to body movements. Hi, monkeys. And so it's been an incredible experience sometimes being out in public with service dogs and training because it brings out the very strangest behaviors in people. It's not uncommon for people to bark at you, for kids or just people to rush up to dogs, for them to say things like, "What's wrong with you?" Yeah, it's really common actually. I will say by and large, most people have far more positive experiences than they do sort of uncomfortable ones, but and I firmly believe people don't realize they're not trying to be cruel. They just have not thought enough about what they're saying to think about what an incredibly personal and offensive thing that can be to say. But I hope that sort of understanding a little bit more about all the possibilities of the ways that dog could be working at any given time would give you a newfound respect for them when you encounter them in public. So does anybody have any questions that we could ask? Answer? Yes.
I'm really glad I'm here. I wish people more in my community had come out. I let people know. I brought flyers from the library.
Oh, thanks.
We don't even call ourselves members, but I'm a part of a community in Massachusetts. It's really vibrant. There's a number of sites where we have physical space and lots of support for folks, some of whom we consider ourselves psychiatric survivors.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to be as different and far from a clinical model where people have experienced trauma and harm in the Western medical psychiatric system. People who are off medications they've taken for decades, doing well, making all kinds of self-determined choices for themselves, and people love animals.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping I'll talk to you later if you could come talk to us.
Sure.
But I just want to say, as someone who's heard a lot of, I've had lots of people make many assumptions about me in the decades that I've had labels that I felt were incorrect for me.
Yeah.
That there's a way that you've been speaking and the language you've used was super respectful to everything you spoke to and ways symptoms manifest and people needing space. And it's just, I'm really grateful to have happened to come here tonight and just hear that. Like, I would have no qualms having you come talk to us because I feel like you wouldn't have a single person. We can't control that, but I'm just really grateful that you seem to have pretty contemporary take on the level of harm that language and questions, and you're not intended, but I'm really excited also specifically at how dogs can help ease people's experience of certain symptoms that are really impactful.
Thanks, that's really nice to hear. We certainly always endeavor to communicate respectfully, and actually we were just talking about before the event began about how I really believe that should also extend to the animals. So most people talk about asking their dog to do something and they call it a command. We never use that. We use the word cue, and we're like, your cue for a line on stage or something, it's just a prompt. We talk about the relationship not as ownership, but as partnership. And it's not uncommon for, if you listen to the fosters talk to the dogs, they say please and thank you. And yeah, those are actually, from a training perspective, if anybody here a dog trainer? No?
I work with them, but I don't.
Okay.
I mimic what they get trained to do by other people, but I don't specifically create training.
Well, it's actually, especially with a puppy, you want to try and sort of minimize the amount of excess language, right? So can you please blank, it's actually sometimes more challenging to teach a young dog, but I teach fosters to teach that way because it changes the way they interact with the dog, to say please and thank you. And it's like, the dogs will catch up and work around it. Whereas if there's, it's always easier to teach a foster that hasn't sort of been a dog owner or trainer, because the sort of dog training world is lagging a little bit behind in terms of the way that like child rearing has changed, and sort of corporal punishment and things. But but also in relation to what you're saying about other, Western, whatever, other institutional experiences. A large number of our clients have been repeatedly institutionalized and, sort of exhausted other avenues. And, not only do I think that the dogs offer assistance that often those other methods fall short in, but there is proof that they actually improve condition. If you look at, I'm sure you guys have all heard about things like that famous study where they followed people that had a heart attack, right? And the people that owned dogs lived longer and recouped faster or whatever. And, you may have heard that, just being in the presence of a dog drops your blood pressure, lowers your heart rate, there releases things like oxytocin, right? And so if you look at things like chronic depression and, a lot of the conditions we work with, they are actually sort of changing your neurology over time. And, it's obviously non-toxic. It's, just incredible. Anyway, I never cease to be still amazed by it, even though I've been doing this for years.
I have a couple questions. One
Sure.
is, how do you get referrals? And two is, I'm someone I've lived with mental illness for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had dogs. I had 2 dogs for 13 years. I have one now. And I'm not a trainer, but we have a really great relationship.
Yeah.
Please, thanks.
Nice.
And so and we may have email, but one of the things that I live with is PTSD and chronic depression. So
Yep.
I was looking for, I didn't know if I learned that you don't train people to train their own dogs. So I get that. But what I was curious about is if there's any service that you know of that could provide that. And I've got my master's in social work. And so I'm hoping to find some way of dovetailing.
Yeah, we actually originally did have a program for train your own service dog program, and we sort of reluctantly terminated it because there's such a demand for it. It's probably half of our calls and emails are about that, but and it can definitely be done, but it's hard to fully communicate to people what a massive endeavor and massive undertaking it is. And it's also really difficult for people to train a dog to respond to symptoms when they're busy experiencing the symptoms. For a lot of the clients, they're at the very time they need to be training the response, they're, having the panic attack or whatever it is, and it's not that it can't happen, but it's really challenging. And as I said before, even organizations that do nothing but train service dogs, have to eat up, 50 to 70%, graduation rates. And so what happens a lot is people are like, I get a puppy and they're going to be a service dog, and they might not come from service dog lines. They might not, they might not be behaviorally suited for service dogs. Then they put in a year or 2 or whatever it is to training the service dog, and then they have to come to the realization that this dog does not have the temperament to be a service dog, or their experiences have culminated in what is not now a temperament, and now they have a dog and they still need a service dog, and it's really challenging. There are some people that do things like get you the basics public access wise, so you can basically do a Canine Good Citizens and a service dog and training program. I think there's 2 people locally. I'm blanking on both of their names at the moment, and then do private training for task training. It's also just, it's one of those hard things for, you know, one of the reasons that organizations have that 50-70% rate is because it's virtually impossible to assess a puppy and determine what they're going to be like, you know, and whether they make a suitable service dog. Plus, you have that sort of added thing of like the experiences they could have in between, you know. They might be attacked by another dog, and that, you know, that changes everything for that dog. It might be physical, you know. They might, you know, they get injured or allergies or, you know, whatever it is. And so, you know, we, like when we're assessing our puppies, we look at all sorts of factors like their desire to follow people, their willingness to interact. Like if you toss a toy to them, do they take the toy and run away, or do they take it over to you and want to engage with you? You know, we looked at things like their recovery rate from being startled. So their startle response, basically, it's like loud noises or sudden motions. When they startle, do they then sort of recover quickly and go to investigate whatever it is? You know, we look at their sensitivity to motion and their sensitivity to touch. We look at their prey drive, you know, but even with all those things that we look at, we're still at 50 to 70% for most organizations. So it's really hard to, it's just like I know it's a much needed thing in the community, but it's really hard for organizations to help as well. And especially given that most organizations are nonprofit, like we are, and then you have a lot of the people that are needing these services are, you know, often are challenged in terms of what they're able to invest in that. And, you know, if you have somebody that has those challenges and then invests a year and a half and their dog doesn't graduate, it can be really difficult. So it's not a great answer, but it sort of highlights a little bit of why we ended up deciding that, and we actually had, you know, we had, yeah, anyway, that's probably the most succinct answer I can give you. Yeah, yes.
On a more practical level for like somebody with a disability,
Yeah.
physical, how would taking care of a dog's duties and
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
from their job?
Totally. Yeah, it's really, it's challenging for a lot of clients physically or energy-wise. You know, we specifically select low-energy dogs because most of our clients are not living high-energy lifestyles, whether it's because of depression or a physical disability. There are lots of techniques that you can use to provide things like exercise to a dog. If you have the space, that's one of the challenges, is like access to a fenced yard or something like that. You know, we had a client that had Lewy body dementia. Anybody know what that is? Yeah. So it's like, you know, it sort of presents like a cross between like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's sort of put together. And he was rapidly losing physical control over his body from the time of enrolling to getting his dog, you know, because you wait 2 years for your dog. And we had to figure out all ways that he could, you know, it's important that the resources and the sort of affection and their needs be met by the person that they're serving, you know, otherwise they'll default to whoever. So, you know, we had to train the dog to use automatic ball throwers that he could just kind of drop a ball in and then the ball would get thrown. And but unfortunately, some people, it does come down to, you know, do they have any other assistance in their life? A lot of times the dogs are not only giving independence to the client, but one or a number of other people that have, you know, had assisting that person be a sort of central focus in their lives as well. There are some organizations out there that help but they are very far and few between. For example, I know Mass General, a lot of our clients are sort of in and out of the hospital for various reasons. Mass General now has a program where people will come and walk your service dog while you're in the hospital, which is amazing, right? Because you know, you have the right to have your service dog there, but the hospital does not have to allocate any resources to having your service dog there, so they don't have to walk it for you or whatever it is, you know? And so these volunteers in the community will come in every day and just go around the hospital and walk whoever service dog needs it, which is incredible, you know? But there's not enough of that, unfortunately, and there's a huge need for sort of general public social services to be educated and engaged in filling that need. You know, even as far as I just met with some police officers recently, and you know, they get zero training. I mean, I know each district is different. I'm not speaking to Greenfield. Hopefully they do a little bit because we talk to them all the time. But you know, this gentleman, he was a client's father, and so he was a cop, and he lived in Rochester. And he had a couple interactions where, you know, this person had been out of control. They didn't know what to do with the service dog, and it prompted this huge conversation. But they don't get any training about how to even, you know, handle, you know, how a dog being present complicates things. And there's all sorts of other social services that are needed, whether it's you know, everything from dog food assistance to dog walking assistance, because usually a dog could make that person independent from other social services in a major way if they could just get those couple of services. You know, if they could just have somebody that came and walked their dog, or just, you know, they could not need sort of in-home visits or whatever. And so it takes us sort of adjusting our perspective on it a little bit. And it's one of the reasons that we do events like this, is to sort of, you know, we go and we talk to kids' schools, hopefully educating the next generation more on it. We've done libraries, other universities, to try and hopefully get people to understand and consider that. But yeah, so that was a long-winded answer, but yeah, you know, we often have to do workarounds is the short answer, but there's not enough services for a lot of people. We do games, like we had one of our clients, she had a major reconstructive surgery for her leg just shortly after her getting her dog. Actually, Haven was the first dog Courtney trained, and was bedridden for over 6 to 8 months after she got, you know, and they have to keep up practicing the behaviors the dog, you know, had learned. And so we had to teach her how to sort of transform all of her stuff to her being in bed, you know. And so, you know, our dogs really don't see practice as any different from play. We want them to just, like, this is all really fun to them. And so we had to just make all of her exercise was running around the apartment and getting things and doing things, you know. But yeah, it's challenging. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
I was just curious how you thought to start the nonprofit, and then what your vision is for the future.
So I actually came at it in a different way than most people. I think most people come into the service dog training as a dog trainer. I actually came through it from an academic perspective. At first, I was studying at Smith, and I was studying psychology, and I met a woman who was doing her master's in social work, and her thesis was on psychiatric service dogs, and I had never heard of them. And she had done this really interesting study. It was a survey of pet owners across the country that had psychiatric conditions, and whether the dogs were innately offering assistance. There were people that were doing things like people that say were being manic and their dogs just wouldn't stop pawing them or, you know, and they, you know, learned that when their dog does that, it's there, you know, would be able to understand and take their medicine. Other behaviors might be like licking away your tears when you cry, you know, various degrees of assistance. But the woman that I met was not incredibly tech savvy, and she actually lived in the apartment above me, and I helped her collate all of this research and sort of make it, computerize it and make it sort of digestible. And in doing so, I just became fascinated with it. It was really, the difference these dogs were making without any training was very dramatic. And I was just thought, God, if this is the potential without training, can you imagine it with it? And so that sort of prompted me to look much more into the uses of psychiatric service dogs. And this was, it was really just starting to become well known. A lot of extra attention was paid to PTSD service dogs with the veterans coming back and things like that. But even today, a lot of people have never heard of a psychiatric service dog, but then it was certainly very rare. And the more I read about it, for everything from autism to PTSD, these other conditions, I thought, oh my God, if this is so great, then why aren't more people doing this? And then I looked into what it took to get a service dog. And I realized that there's not enough people producing them. And the major impetus for me starting this organization was that there were organizations serving people with conditions but only if they were veterans. But people that were not veterans, that had the same conditions, could not get a dog from them. And that is the norm. We're one of the few organizations in the country or the world that serve a lot of the conditions we work with. And I don't understand it really, because it's the same symptoms. It's the same service task. I think it's a little bit of, I don't know if it's just a sort of stigma about mental health or phobia and stuff, but it's a shame because, yeah, I'm sure.
I run into that a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
Like, are you a veteran? I'm like, no, well, see ya.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, our first, many of our first clients all came to us after applying to dozens of other organizations, and being refused for not being a veteran. So I just got, so I had this psychology background, but I didn't know anything about training dogs. And so I went and did a program that was actually designed about training psychiatrists. It's no longer in existence anymore. They now still produce service dogs, but they don't train trainers anymore. And that's one of the other reasons that there's not enough people doing this, is there's not enough places to learn how to do this. But I went and learned, spent a while learning to train service dogs, and then of course had to do my own sort of crash course in what it meant to start a nonprofit and run a business, do that side of things. And we're still a very young organization. We actually have our 5th anniversary in March. Although we technically started a little bit before that. That's the anniversary of when the nonprofit part came into existence. But do you remember how many dogs we've graduated in 5 years? It's 30 something.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah. Sorry, this is Jazz as well, and Ellie. Everybody introduced themselves before. Jazz is our client liaison manager and foster coordinator. And she also has a psychology background and also went to Smith. And so, so that was sort of the trajectory. Yeah. Of course, a lot of the training that I ended up doing with the dogs, I had to, most of the things I was taught were in a very different training style than I was willing to do. People that did things like train police dogs and, were using corrections. And so basically I had to learn what the goal behaviors were, and then go backwards and figure out, how do I train that in a positive way? Especially for the kinds of service dogs that we train, it's so important that they're not nervous and they're not feeling like they're going to be in trouble, for them to have like absolutely no part of their brain is allocated, you know, is just distracted by them being like, you know, they're just like totally, are you okay? I'm good. Are you okay? This is so much fun, you know, like, because they really are almost always working. I mean, we obviously go out of our way to give them time to be dogs and have fun, but they're never like fully off duty, you know? And so it's so important that they love it, you know? Yeah. Do you want to go?
Are your ways of training trainers or common among other organizations?
Unfortunately not. They're common among pet. I think I just pulled my lapel mic out. They're getting more common. The pet dog training world has slowly become more positive reinforcement only. And thankfully, it's almost the norm now, I would say. You know, I'm pulling figure out of thin air, but I would say sort of 70% of trainers are probably positive reinforcement only. But weirdly, the service dog world is lagging behind in sort of making that transformation. I think it's one of those sort of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it sort of things. Yeah, it's startling some of the ways that that people have been doing things for a long time. You know, they produce good dogs, but you know, we're also working with what they call softer dogs than a lot of other types of service dogs. So it's not uncommon for guide dog organizations to take the dogs that they select as puppies, their washouts, like the ones that they don't want to work with, and they will sell those to service dog organizations because they're, you know, non-guide dog service dog because they're basically the opposite traits. Like they want leaders that, you know, they want the dogs that don't bring that toy to you and go and play by themselves, and we want the ones that are engaged and follow. And a lot of like guide dog organizations, you know, they're dogs that aren't going to be as shaken by like a correction. I'm not saying that I would train that way if I was training those dogs, but I certainly can't imagine training any other way than we do. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not super positive. It's slowly moving that direction, but slower than I would like. Did somebody else have a question?
Sarah, do service dogs come in all shapes and sizes?
Why, yes, they do. Yeah, service dogs do come in all shapes and sizes. And one of the other things I should have clarified while I was talking was the difference between therapy dogs, emotional support animals, and service dogs. And so service dogs are trained to assist an individual with a disability. Their disability is defined as any condition that significantly impacts their quality of life, and the dog is task trained to mitigate the burden of that. So task trained meaning being important in that you know, just the presence of the dog is not sufficient. Service dogs are given public access, so it's similar to having like a wheelchair, or you know, you can go into restaurants and, you know, airports, so on and so forth. The laws are actually broken up into 3 different sort of governing bodies. The first is the American Disabilities Act, which sort of grants your right to have a service dog as well as grants your right to privacy. So nobody's allowed to ask you what your disability is. They're allowed to ask you what tasks the dog performs for you, which is very different, you know. And then there's the TSA that governs service dogs in travel and transport. And then there's the Housing Authority that governs dogs in housing. Therapy dogs, on the other hand, are dogs that are invited. They don't have the right to be anywhere. So they would be the dogs that sort of would go into retirement homes or schools, or, you know, they don't have to have any particular training, though often they do. And they're just generally there to sort of make people feel better. Still very important, but they don't have access privileges granted to them by law. And then emotional support animals are a newer thing. It used to be that you could have any type of service animal. In about 2010, they changed a lot of the laws, and now you can only have dogs and miniature horses. And that may seem surprising, but miniature horses actually make sense for a lot of people that need mobility assistance and are larger. Additionally, they live till they're like 40 years old, which sadly, the larger the dog, the shorter the lifespan. And emotional support animals are basically granted housing only access and transportation, so you could take them on the plane. I'm sure everybody's seen those sort of in the media recently, like peacocks on planes and things like that. So there's a little bit of a gray area that the airlines are trying to figure out right now. But basically, emotional support animals don't have to have any training. They can be any species, but they're not granted public access. And so those are some of the common misconceptions, along with different types of dogs being service dogs. I've known, very tiny diabetic and seizure alert dogs, and though often the people that don't have a sort of golden retriever or Labrador or whatever get even that much more pushback out in public. It's really difficult. And there's unfortunately also a lot of things like there's websites out there that will just send you an ID card if you send them a photo. And so people think, oh, where's your ID card? And it's like, actually, there is no ID card. Anyway, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so, Jazz is also pointing out, we do have beautiful calendars available over here. They are $15 each if anybody would like one. They're all featuring Diggity Dogs in training.
It's one of our first fundraisers.
Yes. Yes, it's our last year we did a very small print run of calendars just internally for our staff, and then this year we did some for fundraising too. Yes.
So my question actually went along with the, people with ID cards and stuff like that. How, I've seen a couple of dogs out there that have been questionable whether they're true service dogs, especially like in stores and stuff. And I work in a hospital, so we tend to see people come in with their service dog, and it's like, obviously not. It doesn't have any, they won't have anything on the dog. I know it's not regulated, but how can you, it seems like it's a tricky area sometimes with people wanting to skirt around. I know you can go on Amazon and just buy service dog vests.
It is, and you're also not required to adorn in Massachusetts anyway, your dog's not required to wear a vest. So there are some states that do require that. I think California is one. It's, this comes up a lot for us because service dogs, or people passing dogs that are poorly behaved off as service dogs, can be really disruptive.
A couple months ago, and somebody was in there with a German Shepherd that had on one of those pinch collars and a muzzle on the dog, and a service jacket. Wow. And this dog was all over the place, and the guy's up, and I'm just like, not exactly.
This comes up a lot for us because we've had other people pass their dogs off as ESAs or whatever, passing them off as service dogs, lunge at our dogs or try and attack our dogs, and obviously these experiences can impact the service dog. But I also try and tell, our fosters unfortunately deal with it a lot because, especially on a campus as large as UMass, and people walk their dogs there and whatever. But I also try and tell people we cannot be the service dog police. Right. It's important not to be that because, I really do believe that people should have the right to train their own service dog. Just like we were talking about before, it's really hard. Not everybody has the ability to fundraise to get their service dog, or to wait 2 years, or they might have the skills. A lot of people, if you've had 1, 2, 3 service dogs, you probably are a decent enough trainer now to train your next service dog, And I do believe that they should have the right to, And it's also important to remember that service dogs in training are given those same access privileges in Massachusetts and most states as fully trained service dogs. And so I'm not sure why, like when it comes to like a dog needing a muzzle, I don't. Yeah, but.
It was a wire.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I do think muzzles, I'd rather see somebody being cautious and have a dog in a muzzle than somebody being, thoughtless and taking a dog that, to me, I'm like, that dog looks super nervous and scared and like whatever, So, I do like to encourage people that, like, if a dog is still in training, they're not machines. They're never perfect. And it is a really difficult area to address and to regulate. And I know I get this question. It's the number one thing that people ask me at, like, restaurants or events or, who can I tell to come in or not? And it's if the dog is being disruptive in any way, you have the right to ask it to leave it. And if they're not being disruptive, I think it makes sense to err on the side of believing that the person is a service dog, because if it's not being disruptive, what's the, and I know there'll probably be some people that take advantage of it, but it is illegal and there's pretty major consequences if they do that. But it's hard to prove.
I just wanted to ask the trainers,
Yeah.
what do you call them?
Fosters, trainers,
A couple
both.
things. One is, what's the most challenging thing? And two is, how has it changed your life?
I think for me the most challenging thing is recently I've been getting lots of different dogs, and just every time I get a new dog I have to every dog is different. They come with their own challenges and things that you have to work around, and something that works with one dog might not work with another dog, so figuring out different training styles and ways to go about attacking certain issues is hard. And not giving them up is hard too. That's the easy answer. I feel like I've given up so many dogs by now. I'm like,
And how has it changed your life?
I used to be scared of dogs. So that's a big thing. And just the sense of community and just always having a partner there next to you. I don't know, just makes every day funner. Everywhere you go, you have a friend next to you.
We do have a very tight-knit community of fosters, which is wonderful. Do you have anything to say about that, Zach?
Giving them up would probably my answer too, but also, little things that pop up that you're not expecting. He cut his foot a month ago, and he was pretty ridden for a long time. A lot of his training declined. So
Yep.
unexpected things like that are never fun.
And how has it changed your life?
It's made me more confident, people approaching me and asking about it, and better at talking to people, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of our fosters say that they, because they're responsible for advocating for their dog, right? They have to be like, excuse me, can you not? She's working or whatever. That's a really hard thing to do. I mean, even at any age, but I think especially as a young college student, and but they have to do it. And learning to advocate for their dog actually enables them to learn to sort of communicate and advocate for themselves as well.
Probably the giving them up. Balancing with being a full-time student is definitely what's the hardest. But yeah.
How has it changed your life?
I don't know, same as them. It's just, I think that I saw a completely different side to how people with disabilities are treated, and being able to kind of experience that as someone without a disability is really eye-opening. I don't know. Yeah, just a lot of things.
Also, if I can, not that you asked me, I know you asked them, but I think it's also a completely different way to see a dog. Because most people just don't have the luxury of being able to spend that much time around their dog, or have been taught how to communicate that effectively with their dog. And so really learning the potential of the type of relationship you can have with them is I don't know, I think one of the most amazing parts of it.
Do you have within your nonprofit, I heard you say students get credit for being trainers and fosters, or just trainers, and that there's fosters to a couple different types or sort of levels of skills you need. Do you have any volunteer opportunities, like not at that level, but volunteers that you need like support to run your nonprofit?
We have relief fosters, so that they come and get basic training, and so they might, take a dog like on during break or something. Summers can sometimes be challenging for us. In terms of general volunteers,
we are looking for a grant writer.
Yeah, we're looking for a grant writer. One of the things that is challenging for us a lot of times is, people can ebb and flow in their sort of commitment too. And so it's hard for us to put a lot of time into training somebody, and then, things like high school students often come to us, but they're gonna be gone in a year, and it's difficult if people don't have a ton of the skills already. And so every now and then we'll have stuff. We might have an event or some sort of promotion, but
I was just gonna say that the fosters, it's not just a college class. It's a minimum 2-semester commitment. You have strenuous prerequisites you have to fulfill. We really make sure that these people actually want to be in it and for a long enough time. And we actually don't even accept, we don't look for senior students. We look for them younger. We do accept seniors if they're not second semester because it's a 2-semester commitment. But we look for the students who have a year, 2 years, 3 years to really give to the program, because it takes so long to get someone to the point of them being capable of doing it without you doing it with them, that there needs to be really some return on that so they can work independently.
And is it, for all the positions of people working with dogs or having a dog with them all the time, do you need to have a car? I know that seems like a basic question, but do you physically as a human have to have a car that you have access to?
well, our fosters carpool a lot, so they just have to be at class, but
is
No.
sensitivity
No.
to your dog and learning how to be in a car, do you need to?
well, we would for those that didn't have a car, we would definitely. So the dogs also swap fosters for about a week every 4 to 6 weeks, and so it's a really important part of the dogs learning to be able to cope, when they eventually do get moved. And often it actually is the time that we see all sorts of problem behaviors that we didn't see with the full-time foster. And so it's everybody's least favorite time. Everybody wants their own dog back all the time. It's chaotic, but it's a really important part of the process. And so if we had a foster stay without a car, during dog swaps, they would go to somebody with a car, or we would pointedly, yeah.
And some of our fosters who live in some of our fosters live in Boston, and so they'll take the train with their dog to meet up with someone who has a car, and then they all carpool.
Yeah.
So it's nice that those dogs also get that experience.
It's really impressive. These students come back, it's important to remember this is a year-round commitment, but they're only in school, whatever, May to, or September to May. So we have fosters that, live on the Cape or in P-Town, they drive back for classes throughout the summer. It's a really big commitment. I'm just always amazed and grateful at what they do. Anybody else? Yes.
Do Medicare, Medicaid, or any insurance companies pay for any part?
Very rarely. We have had a couple of people that had been institutionalized so many times that one person institutionalized so many times that I think they were willing to look at anything that might prevent that happening. We had another person whose mom worked at the insurance company, and we have had one school district contribute, but it's very rare.
There's big pharma and insurance companies go hand in hand, but basically they come to us and they prove to us that this is more cost efficient.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's if someone's institutionalized, it costs $30,000 to stay in hospital for a day. So you can make that argument.
Yeah.
And that it will be short-term upfront investment, but it will prevent that person from being institutionalized in the future.
And one of the things actually that we're trying to do is produce a academically published study in order to prove that, because until it's proven to insurance companies, they're not going to pay for it, you know. But it's without a doubt worth it. You know, people, almost all of our clients dramatically reduce, if not eliminate, you know, a lot of medications. They reduce their therapeutic support team needs. They eliminate or reduce, you know, hospitalizations. They, you know, emergency room trips, all sorts of things. But nobody's quantified it for the insurance companies, you know? And so we're trying to, you know, it's been a little slow going in the process just because it's a major undertaking that requires tracking clients pre and post placement for several years. And there's all sorts of confidentiality variables and variables of each client being so unique. You know, a lot of our clients have many different conditions, you know, and so anyway, but we're trying to work with other professors at UMass and in the 5 colleges to look at this from a financial standpoint and try and prove it to the insurance companies, because it's in their best interest, just nobody can prove it yet. Yeah.
I know we, at the RLC, the Recovery Learning Community, although we're changing our name this month because we get so associated with addiction using the word recovery, which includes, it's just not exclusive.
Right.
So we have a lot of evidence base that we look to, because there's so much more than ever before about, you know, things that aren't proven yet, like this whole chemical imbalance. It has not been proven as a real thing.
Right.
So things like that. So we would love if we got better access to dogs that supported us.
Yeah.
It would be awesome.
Yeah.
We could somehow support the gathering of evidence.
Yeah.
In some way. I don't know what that is right now, but
yeah, we're certainly open to chatting about it, to talking. You know, we certainly go out of our way to get our dogs in spaces with people that are, you know, various communities similar to that in the area. It is a little bit of an undertaking in terms of coordinating many fosters and dogs to be anywhere at once, especially with their time commitment that they're already taking on. But Ellie.
Decided it's playtime.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
What's the cost of the dog to the client?
It is $12,500, which we just raised from $10,000. The cost to our organization is at least $25,000 per dog. And so we have to supplement that with fundraising, and that's standard for the industry. $10,000 is pretty much baseline. There are a couple of organizations that are very lucky and manage to give dogs away for free because they're sponsored by like Milkbone or, you know, have grants or whatever. But the industry, the accepted cost in the industry is between $25,000 and $40,000, or some even say $50,000. Yeah, $25,000 to $50,000 to actually produce each dog.
do you take credit? Do you accept credit?
Yeah, like cards.
As payment, as part of partial payment for having a dog, or person getting a dog?
Meaning, can you use a credit card? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I mean. I wasn't sure if it was clear what that meant.
We also have a payment plan.
Yeah, we have payment plans and fundraising options. Yeah. You know, definitely, it's easier for some people to fund. Like, you know, our kids, for example, tend to have a much, you know, Michaela with the seizure disorder that I showed at the beginning of this had a very easy time doing her fundraising. You know, they had a couple softball games, the whole community chipped in, you know. But there's not the same sort of social stigma about, you know, a child with a seizure disorder as there are for a lot of the other conditions. So it can be really hard for some of our clients, especially people that are struggling with social phobia and anxiety anyway, or people that tend to be more isolated, you know, and not have a huge family network to draw on. And so we do tell people it's not like we have this massive fundraising department. It really does require you sort of pushing that ball forward, but we provide the framework, and it allows all the funds raised to be tax deductible, which often helps people in raising the money. Yeah, and then we have payment plans and things.
What breed is that?
She is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. Yeah.
She's proof that good things come in small packages.
Yeah.
Small is good either.
Anybody else? I feel like if we could wrap up, maybe it's up to the trainers, but I'm sure the dogs could say hello to people. Yeah.
Some calendars and donation things over there if people are interested, and you can always sign up to be on our mailing list on our website.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.